Last week, we spent over 100,000 tokens on Claude Code. Then I found CodeGraph. It claims that AI agents don't need to read your code anymore, and some even claim that it can save 90% of your token usage. Sounds too good to be true, right? So I decided to test myself. Instead of choosing a toy project, I chose a real one. Firecrawl, more than 1,000 files. Let's see if CodeGraph can actually make Claude Code cheaper. For this benchmark, I use Claude Sonnet 4. I know Opus is much more powerful, but most Claude Code users use Sonnet because it's faster and cheaper, so I think it's a more realistic setup. To make the comparison fair, I studied a fresh Claude Code session for every test to avoid any cache effects. Then I asked Claude the same 3 questions. For each question, I recorded cost and API duration. First, I tested plain Claude Code. It is without CodeGraph. Then I installed CodeGraph and repeated the exact same benchmark. Let's go. First, let's test Claude Code without CodeGraph. For the first question, how is rate limiting implemented in Firecrawl? Claude Code took 77 seconds and cost 23 cents. For the second question, how does Firecrawl schedule crawling jobs? This time it took 79 seconds and cost 26 cents. For the third question, explain the complete crawl lifecycle in Firecrawl. Since this question involves multiple components across a code base, it was the most expensive one. Claude spent 2 minutes and 16 seconds and cost 34 cents. By the end of the 3 questions, I had spent almost $1. Not terrible, but not exactly cheap either. In Germany, that's basically one trip to the toilet at Berlin Central Station. So before spending another $1, I decided to install CodeGraph and rerun the exact same benchmark. For the first question, rate limiting without CodeGraph, it costs 23 cents and API duration lasts for 77 seconds. And with CodeGraph, it costs 30 cents and API duration lasts for 30 seconds. So for this question, CodeGraph made Claude Code 44% cheaper and 61% faster. For the second question, crawl job scheduling, the cost was basically the same, 26 cents before and 27 cents after. But CodeGraph still made Claude 27% faster. For the third question, crawl lifecycle, it's the most complex question, dude. CodeGraph made Claude 25% cheaper and 37% faster. Across all 3 questions, average cost went from about 28 cents to 22 cents. Average API duration went from 97 seconds to 58 seconds. So in this benchmark, CodeGraph made Claude Code roughly 21% cheaper and 40% faster. Not exactly the 90% token usage some were boasting about. The most interesting result came from question 2. How does Firecrawl schedule crawling jobs? The total cost was almost the same before and after using CodeGraph. Haiku cost dropped from 90.1 cents to almost 0 cents. But for Sonnet models, the cents increased from 7.1 to 27 cents. I was so confused as CodeGraph almost eliminated the search cost, but why didn't the total cost go down? Well, I think I found the answer. Without CodeGraph, Claude spent a lot of tokens searching the repository, like the searching files, scraping symbols, and reading code. That's why Haiku was so expensive. After installing CodeGraph, almost all of that disappeared. But something interesting happened. The safe search cost provided by the Haiku model was replaced by reading cost by the Sonnet model. Instead of spending tokens searching files, Sonnet spent more tokens understanding the scheduling pipeline. So the total bill stayed roughly the same. In other words, the cost wasn't eliminated. It was shifted from search to reasoning. And that's exactly what CodeGraph is designed for. It doesn't make Sonnet smarter. It simply prevents Claude from getting lost. And honestly, I think that's a much more interesting story than just saying, oh, CodeGraph saved 90% of my tokens. Because in my benchmark on Firecrawl, the real benefit wasn't eliminating reasoning. It was eliminating unnecessary searching. Overall, I think CodeGraph is a pretty interesting project, although it didn't magically reduce my token usage by 90% as some claim like that. In my case, as you have seen, it's just 21% on average cheaper and 40% faster. It doesn't automatically make every query cheaper. It just helps Claude Code spend less to explore the code base. Also, it cannot replace reasoning, and it could, in some cases, make the reasoning cost more. One more thing worth mentioning, CodeGraph documentation is a little stale. During my setup, I noticed that the interactive installer already initialized the repository automatically, so you don't need to run CodeGraph init manually anymore, even though the doc still says so. It confused me for a little while, so I opened an issue on GitHub to help clarify this for future users. If you try CodeGraph or any other ways to reduce token usage, let me know in the comments. This is for today. I'm Magenta. See you in the next one. Bye.